A Journey into Being, the Awakening of Consciousness. You are not here by chance. Something within you led you to these words. Perhaps a quiet whisper, a silent intuition, or that persistent feeling that there is more, something you have yet to discover deep within yourself. This book, How to Master Your Mind, author unknown, is not a traditional guide. It doesn't offer magic formulas or absolute answers. It is, rather, a doorway, an invitation to look inward, to cross the threshold of outer noise, and venture into the mystery of your own consciousness. Within its pages, you won't find certainties, but awakening questions. Reflections that challenge. Silences that reveal. Because true knowledge is not imposed, it is remembered. And you are about to remember who you truly are. If you're ready to move beyond the superficial, to face your shadows and embrace your truth, then this book is for you. This is not just a book to read. It is an experience to be lived. A call to awaken. A one-way journey back to your purest essence. Peace, wisdom, and truth already dwell within you. You only need to open your eyes. Prologue, A Journey into Being. At some point in our lives, each of us feels a call. Sometimes it comes as a whisper in the quiet of the night, other times as a shout resonating amidst the chaos. This call doesn't come from outside, from the world around us. It comes from a deeper place, a forgotten corner within ourselves that has been waiting to be heard. Who am I really? What lies beyond what I think I know about myself? This book is an invitation not to discover something that isn't already within you, but to remember what has always been there. It's not about finding answers outside, but about walking inward, looking with new eyes and a new awareness into the depths of your own being. Because within you, beneath the layers of conditioning, expectations, and fear, there is an immutable truth, a silent wisdom that has been waiting for you. An invitation to awaken. The awakening of consciousness is not an event that happens overnight. It is a journey, a process, a path we travel in moments of quiet, in daily challenges, in our simplest interactions. Sometimes this awakening is subtle, like a soft breeze we barely feel. Other times, it's a profound change, a jolt that forces us to see the world and ourselves in a completely new way. This book doesn't claim to be an exact map or an instruction manual. There's no single path to awakening because the journey is deeply personal. But what you will find here are reflections, stories, and moments that, like lights in the darkness, will guide you back to yourself, to that part of you that has been dormant, waiting for its moment to emerge. Listening to the soul. Throughout these pages, I invite you to allow yourself to listen, not just with your mind, but with your heart. The answers we seek are rarely found in the noise of constant thought. Instead, they are revealed in moments of silence, when we finally give ourselves permission to stop running, to stop searching outside, and begin to listen to what has always been within us. Listening to your soul is not a simple act. It often requires us to confront parts of ourselves we have avoided, shadows we have hidden. But in that honest listening, we find the truth of who we are, what we want, and where we are going. And in that truth, we find the peace we have so longed for. The beginning of transformation. This book is only the beginning, a starting point for you to begin to see the world with new eyes as you read. Throughout each chapter, you'll find reflections you may have felt before, questions you may have already asked yourself in moments of quiet. But now, I invite you to explore them with a new perspective, to allow yourself to feel more than to just think about the words. Because it is in that emotional connection, in that deep feeling, that true transformation occurs. What happens when we stop running from ourselves? That's the question that will accompany you throughout this journey. Because true peace, true freedom, is not found in the answers the world gives us, but in those we discover within ourselves, in that sacred place where the noise of the world can no longer reach us. This is not a book to be read quickly. It is not a story that needs to be finished. It is a reflection of your own journey, a mirror that will show you parts of yourself you may not have seen before. So I invite you to read it slowly, to feel it, to live it, and to allow each word, each reflection, to awaken that dormant spark within you. There is no final destination on this journey. The awakening of consciousness is not a place we arrive at, but a state in which we live, a state in which, moment by moment, we allow ourselves to see beyond illusions, beyond fear, and to connect with the truth of who we truly are. So, dear reader, with an open heart and a calm mind, I invite you to begin this journey, a journey into yourself, toward the awakening of your own consciousness, toward the truth that has always been waiting to be discovered. Welcome, the path has already begun. Chapter 1, The awakening of inner knowledge. As far back as I can remember, there was always a feeling that something was missing. I'm not referring to the achievements or goals that society dictates as essential, but to something deeper, more fundamental. It was a restlessness, a question softly beating within me. Who am I, really? It wasn't an immediate or direct question, but rather a persistent feeling that filtered through moments of silence, perhaps during a solitary walk at dawn, or in the quiet of the night when everything is calm and distractions dissolve. In those moments, I felt there had to be something more. I couldn't be content with the surface of things. And this is where my awakening began. The inner voice that never quiets. Once, while observing the constant rhythm of the world, I realized something fundamental. Most people live without questioning. They move from one place to another, from one situation to the next, carrying their responsibilities like a heavy backpack, but very few stop to ask, who is carrying that backpack? Why am I carrying it? One day, I found myself at a crossroads, looking at the path I had taken until then. I had achieved accomplishments, met goals, but my soul remained thirsty. At that moment, a voice within me whispered, "There's more, much more." And I decided to follow that voice. That decision, though I didn't know it at the time, changed everything. It wasn't about changing jobs or relationships, but about something more intimate, something I could no longer ignore. It was the call of my own being. A journey inward. It was then that I understood that the true journey is not outward, but inward. Society teaches us to look outside, to seek validation, success, recognition. But true fulfillment, that which we all long for, lies in the silent space of our own mind, waiting to be discovered. I often wondered why we keep searching outside ourselves for what we already have within. I remember a conversation I once had with a friend who, like me, felt that same inexplicable dissatisfaction. "How do you know when you've woken up?" he asked. I looked him in the eyes and replied, "Awakening is not an event, it's a process. It begins when you stop looking outside and realize that it has always been within you." The awakening of inner knowledge is not a moment of sudden epiphany, but rather a succession of small flashes, moments of clarity that invite you to go deeper. These are the moments when you feel that everything fits, like pieces of a puzzle you've been assembling in your mind for years without even knowing it. The soul's call. There is a moment in everyone's life when the soul whispers more strongly. Perhaps it's after a painful loss or a crisis that shakes you to your core. That moment comes when everything you thought you knew crumbles, and you are left alone with your questions. Who am I, really? What do I truly want in this life? Sometimes, when we are caught up in daily routine, we forget these fundamental questions. We get distracted by the noise of the world, but the call is always there, like a distant echo that never completely fades. What do I do with this emptiness? A close person once asked me after going through a dark period. I told them, that emptiness is not your enemy, it's your doorway to yourself. Don't fill it with external things. Instead, enter into it. Only then will you truly know who you are. The answers born from silence. The answers to life's big questions don't come from outside, from a book or a conference. They arrive in moments of quiet, when you allow yourself to be in silence and listen to your own soul. What if the knowledge you've always sought is already within you? It was in those moments of silence that I discovered that true wisdom is not about learning more, but about remembering what we have always known. We are all born with this inner knowledge, but we forget it as we grow, adapt, and try to fit into a world that takes us from our essence. So I ask you, have you taken the time to listen to your own voice, the one that whispers amidst the noises of daily life? Connecting with your purpose. The awakening of inner knowledge is ultimately a return to oneself. It is not something mystical or unattainable. It is the moment you understand that you have always had the answers. Purpose is not something that awaits you in the future, but something that already lives within you, ready to manifest when you dare to look it in the face. From that moment on, your life changes, not because external circumstances do, but because your perception of them changes. You realize that you have always had the power to choose, to create, to feel, and in that recognition, you find a peace that no external success can offer you. Are you ready to awaken? This is your journey, your moment. Inner knowledge has always been there, waiting for you to discover it. Chapter 2. The relationship between mind and body, a new science. There is an invisible bridge that connects what we think with what we feel, what we imagine with what we manifest. Sometimes that bridge seems broken, as if our emotions and thoughts float aimlessly, affecting our body in ways we don't understand. However, what happens in our mind has a deep echo in our body. Who hasn't felt tension in their shoulders after a day full of worries, or that inexplicable fatigue that appears without any physical exertion? I clearly remember the moment I understood the magnitude of this connection. It wasn't in a classroom or a medical book. It was in my own life, in those days when my body seemed to fail even though all medical tests said I was fine. I felt a weight in my chest that no diagnosis could explain. What if the problem wasn't in my body, but in my mind? The emotions that speak through the body. I have known many people who, like me, have felt that inexplicable emptiness, that ailment that seems to have no physical origin. A friend once told me, "I feel like something is crushing me inside, but the doctors say there's nothing wrong with me." I looked him in the eyes and asked, "And what emotions are you carrying inside that you've never let out?" The silence on his face was the answer. Sometimes we carry the weight of unexpressed emotions, unresolved thoughts, and our body becomes the receiver of that conflict. Persistent headaches, migraines that appear when you least expect them, that tension in your neck that won't go away, these are signals, messages the body sends us when our mind is trapped in the whirlwind of repressed emotions. An ancient science with a new face. Although it may seem new, the relationship between mind and body has been known since ancient times. The wise people of past civilizations already understood that what happens in our mind directly affects our body. However, in our modern era, we have forgotten that truth. We have separated what should never have been divided, the mind and the body. In my search for answers, I came to a deep understanding. Every thought has a vibration, and that vibration directly impacts our cells. A thought of fear or anxiety is not just a mental state. It becomes a chain of physical reactions that affect everything from blood pressure to the immune system. And the opposite is also true. A thought of peace or gratitude has the power to heal. How can that be possible? A colleague once asked me. It's simple, I replied. The body hears everything the mind says, even when we think we're not paying attention. The science of emotions. I remember the first time I heard about the biochemistry of emotions. It seemed incredible to me that every emotion had a chemical reaction in the body. Fear produces adrenaline, sadness lowers the immune system, joy releases endorphins. It's as if our body is a constant reflection of our emotional state. One day, while working with a person suffering from a chronic illness, I asked them a question that would change our conversation. What emotions have you not released? At that moment, I saw their eyes fill with tears. It was as if, for the first time, someone had allowed them to see the connection between their years of emotional suffering and the illness they suffered from. For years, they told me, I have carried the weight of guilt and resentment that I never allowed myself to feel. And with that confession, we began the true healing process. Because even if we don't see it, every emotion we repress finds a way to manifest itself, and the body is its canvas. The body as a mirror of the mind. The body, though silent, always speaks. Sometimes it does so with a whisper, other times with a scream that we cannot ignore. And the more we try to silence those unexpressed emotions, the stronger that scream becomes. The body becomes a mirror that reflects the state of our mind. If the mind is in chaos, the body shows it. If the mind is at peace, the body relaxes. A close friend, who had always been skeptical about these connections, confessed to me one day, I've noticed that when I'm anxious, my back hurts more, but when I feel calm, the pain disappears. I smiled and told them, there's the clearest proof. It's not magic, it's the science of being. The body doesn't reveal itself without reason. Every pain, every symptom is an invitation to look within ourselves. It's not a battle between mind and body. It's a dialogue, and the deeper that dialogue, the easier it is to understand what the body is telling us. The power to transform reality. So the question is not only, how can I heal my body? But also, what must I heal in my mind? True science is not just about curing physical symptoms, but about going to the origin of what affects us. I have seen how people who carried pain for years found relief by releasing emotions they had repressed for so long. Once, in a conversation with a woman who had spent years suffering from migraines, I asked her, have you ever thought about what your body is telling you with that pain? She looked at me confused at first, but then after a while, she understood. Her headache was not just physical, it was an accumulation of worries, of unexpressed fears. And over time, as she released those emotions, the migraines began to disappear. The body and mind are intertwined in a perfect dance. They are not separate entities, but the same energy manifested in different forms. And when we understand that, when we realize that our thoughts and emotions directly influence our physical health, we begin to take control of our reality. What story is your body telling? So today, I invite you to stop for a moment and listen to what your body is telling you. Do you feel tension? Does any part of your body hurt? Ask yourself, what emotion am I not expressing? What thought have I not wanted to face? Because true healing is not only physical, it is also mental and emotional. When we heal our mind, our body follows. It is an ancient science rediscovered in these times, and each of us has the power to practice it. The body is your companion on this journey of life. Take care of it, listen to it, and you will see how it responds with gratitude. Mind and body are one, and when both are in balance, life becomes a harmonious dance. Are you ready to begin that dance? Chapter 3: The Power of Decision. Taking control of your reality. Life is a constant crossroads. At every step, the path branches, inviting us to choose. Sometimes these decisions seem small, insignificant, almost automatic. But if you look back, you'll realize that every choice, no matter how minimal, has led you to the exact place where you are today. I remember the day I understood the magnitude of my decisions. It wasn't an extraordinary moment. I was sitting alone, gazing at the horizon, reflecting on the chaos I felt within myself at the time. Life had led me to places I didn't understand, and for the first time, I asked myself, did I truly choose this path, or did I simply let the wind carry me? The answer came like a whisper: every decision, conscious or not, has brought you here. Deciding without deciding. One of the biggest mistakes we make is believing that by not deciding, we avoid responsibility. However, not choosing is also a choice. When we don't take control of our decisions, we allow circumstances to decide for us, and thus we become victims of the environment, of destiny, without realizing that, deep down, it was we who yielded that power. Once, while talking to someone who felt their life was out of control, they told me, "I don't know how I got here. I don't know how everything fell apart." I looked them in the eyes and asked, "What decisions did you not make?" There was a deep silence, a moment when we both knew that the answer wasn't in the circumstances, but in the moments when they let the river of life drag them along without resistance. They thought that not deciding protected them from error, but in reality, it had stripped them of control over their life. The hidden power in every choice. The most fascinating thing about decisions is that they don't always appear big at first. Sometimes, what seems like a small step, a yes or a no of no importance, can trigger a series of events that completely transform our reality. Every decision is a seed we plant in the garden of our life, and over time, we see how it flourishes or wilts according to the intention we put into it. I once faced a decision that terrified me. It was one of those decisions you know will change your life, but also fills you with fear. What if I'm wrong? What if I choose badly? I asked myself many times. But then I remembered something I had learned along the way. There are no wrong decisions when they are chosen from one's own truth. How do you know if it's the right decision? Someone once asked me. And I replied, the right decision isn't always the easiest, but it's always the one that brings you closer to yourself. The decisions that define who you are. Life is nothing more than a succession of decisions. Some small, like what you'll eat today. Others large, like who you'll share your life with or what career path you'll follow. But what we often forget is that we are not only deciding about events or actions, but about who we want to be. Every decision is an affirmation of our identity. When you choose love over fear, you are deciding to be someone who lives from the heart. When you choose honesty over convenience, you are defining yourself as someone of integrity. What decisions are you making every day? I remember a day when I had to choose between staying in a place that no longer made me happy or launching myself into the unknown. I knew that staying there offered security, but I also knew that remaining in that place was betraying myself. It wasn't easy, but I chose to jump, and in that leap, I discovered something that changed my life forever. The universe always responds when you decide from authenticity. The questions that change everything. Often, when we face a difficult decision, our mind fills with questions. What will happen if I'm wrong? What will others think? What if I'm not capable? But there is one question that completely transforms the perspective. A question that is not about the outcome but about the process. Who do I want to be in this situation? When you ask yourself who you want to be, you stop focusing on fears or external expectations. Instead of worrying about the result, you focus on aligning with your truth, with the best version of yourself. That is the most powerful decision you can make. A friend, in a moment of confusion, asked me, "How can I be sure that I'm making the right decision?" I replied, "You can't always be sure of the outcome, but you can always be sure of yourself. If you choose from authenticity, from your essence, you will never be in the wrong place. The control that has always been in your hands. The power of decision resides not only in the action you take, but in the recognition that you have always had control. Every time you choose, you are shaping your reality. You are the sculptor, and life is the marble. Do you realize that power? The most transformative thing is to understand that you don't need to wait for a big moment to take control of your life. Every day is full of small decisions that have a profound impact, from how you react to a difficult situation to what thoughts you choose to cultivate in your mind. Everything counts. Once, as I reflected on the paths I had taken in my life, I realized that many of the decisions that had led me to my greatest joys did not seem important at the time. But there was something in common in all of them. They were decisions I made from my truth, without fear of external judgment, without fear of failure. Deciding is creating. So I ask you, what decisions have you been avoiding? What power have you not claimed? Because every time you choose, you are creating. Life is not something that happens to you. It is something you are creating in every moment with every decision. Power is not in the future or in the circumstances around you. Power is in the now, in the conscious choice of how to respond, how to act, how to be. And the beauty of all this is that you don't need to wait. You can start right now, because in this very moment, as you read these words, you have the power to decide. The control of your reality has always been in your hands, waiting for you to claim it. What will you decide today? Chapter 4. The Search for God, a Personal Journey. There's always a moment in everyone's life when the soul cries out for answers. This search, though sometimes we don't realize it, is the deepest impulse we feel. Some call it curiosity, others call it a crisis, but in reality, it's the silent call of something greater than ourselves. It's the question that beats behind every action, behind every success and every failure. Who is God? For many years, I lived without consciously asking myself that question. Life led me down paths of responsibilities, worldly goals, and the expectations others had placed on me. They told me I should seek God in sacred books, in temples, in the words of those who knew more. And I, like so many others, tried to do it. But something didn't fit. Despite all my efforts, that feeling of emptiness remained, silent but persistent. Then one day, I realized something that changed my life forever. God is not in an external place. He is in the whisper that comes from within. The fear of God. I clearly remember my first sensation of fear towards the idea of God. I grew up in an environment where God was seen as a severe judge, always observing, always ready to punish any deviation from the path. I was taught to fear, to try to win His favor through specific acts and behaviors. But that fear moved me further away from the peace I sought. How could a God who is love generate so much fear? I asked myself over and over. And it was in that question that my true search began. "Where do you think you'll find God?" someone close to me once asked. I replied almost without thinking, "I believe God is everywhere, but we don't see Him because we're too busy looking for Him outside ourselves." A journey inward. The day I stopped looking for God externally, in imposed structures and doctrines, was the day I began to find Him. Because the search for God is actually a journey inward, a journey in which you face your fears, your doubts, those parts of yourself you'd prefer not to look at. There were days when I felt I was getting more lost in the darkness of my mind. How can it be that seeking God makes me feel so lost? I thought in those moments. But then I understood that to find the light, I first had to go through the shadow. You can't reach the core of your being without first confronting the layers you've created to protect yourself. I remember one particular night. I was alone under the starry sky, and a feeling of immensity enveloped me. I felt for the first time that the connection to something greater was not in the words I said or the rituals I followed, but in the simple act of being present in that quietness. In that moment, I knew that God was not a distant being, but a constant presence. Where is God? I have been asked this question many times. Where is God? And every time I hear it, I pause for a moment before answering, because the truth is, it cannot be explained in words. God is not in a place. He is not a destination you reach after fulfilling certain conditions. God is that spark you feel in the most unexpected moments. Once, a friend going through a deep crisis told me, "I've searched for God for years, but I still feel like I can't find Him. What am I doing wrong?" I looked at him with compassion and said, "Perhaps you're looking outside for what has always been within you." There is no greater truth than that. God is not something found in moments of grandeur, in achievements, or in successes. God is in the details, in the silences, in the pauses we make in the midst of chaos. The search that never ends. The beauty of the search for God is that it never ends. It's not a journey with an endpoint, but a constant dance between the known and the unknown. Every time you think you've found all the answers, a new door opens, and a new question arises. And that's what makes this search so profoundly human and divine at the same time. One day, while reflecting on my own spiritual journey, someone asked me, "Have you found God?" I smiled and replied, "I find Him every day. But the curious thing is that every time I do, I discover there's more to know." And that's the magic of this journey. God is not a concept we can possess or define completely. Each person experiences Him differently because each person has their own path to Him. The questions that change everything. Throughout this process, questions arose that accompanied me every step of the way. Who am I really, beyond what I've believed myself to be? What parts of me are ready to be released? And most importantly, what am I willing to create now that I've let go of what no longer serves? These questions don't have easy answers, but each one opens a door to a greater understanding of ourselves. And in that understanding, we find the power to transform ourselves. One day, someone asked me, "How do you know if you've truly changed?" I reflected for a moment and replied, "You know it when you no longer feel the need to cling to the past, when the fear of the unknown turns into excitement for what is to come." Transformation as a continuous journey. Letting go of the old self is only the beginning. The transformation of being is a continuous journey, a dance between letting go and rebirth. It's not a destination we reach, but a process we live every day. The true power of transformation lies in our ability to embrace the new, to trust that by leaving behind what no longer serves us, we are creating space for who we truly are. And that, ultimately, is the purpose of this journey, to discover and express our purest essence. So I ask you, what part of you is ready to be released? What old story are you willing to leave behind to allow the birth of your most authentic self? This is your journey. Transformation is not an event, it's a path, and on that path, you'll find more than you ever imagined. Because with every step, you are returning to yourself. Chapter 6. Between Science and Spirituality, Unexpected Connections. From a very young age, science always fascinated me. The numbers, the laws that govern the universe, the relentless logic of every natural phenomenon. It seemed to me that by understanding the laws of the physical world, I was deciphering the secret code that kept everything in balance. But as I grew older, a question slowly began to emerge within me: is this all there is? It wasn't a doubt about science itself, but a feeling that something was missing. No matter how much the numbers spoke to me of the universe, there was something within me, something deep and essential, that found no answers in equations or theories. It was then that I began to explore spirituality. Although I did so with some apprehension at first, it seemed alien, something that clashed with my rational side. How could spirituality, with its intangible focus, coexist with the science I valued so much? Two separate worlds. For many years, I believed that science and spirituality were separate worlds, like two rivers that would never cross. In my mind, science was based on facts, on evidence, on what could be seen and measured, while spirituality, on the other hand, seemed to me a nebulous terrain full of beliefs that could not always be explained with clarity. But then something unexpected happened. The more I delved into both fields, the more I realized that instead of opposing each other, science and spirituality began to intertwine like two threads of the same fabric. What if they weren't enemies but companions? What if, instead of contradicting each other, they complemented each other? Once, while studying the behavior of quantum particles, I had a revelation that changed the way I saw the world. At that microscopic level, particles seemed to behave in ways that defied all logic. They could be in more than one place at the same time or change their behavior depending on whether they were being observed. It was as if the universe itself was playing with the rules of reality, and suddenly a question arose in my mind. Could consciousness be connected to these phenomena? The quantum mystery and consciousness. The quantum world opened an unexpected door for me. Here was science at its most fundamental level, suggesting that reality was not as solid as it seemed. Particles did not follow predetermined paths but responded to the observer. What did this mean for us, human beings? Could it be that our thoughts, our intentions, were somehow influencing the very fabric of the universe? As I reflected on this idea, spiritual teachings that spoke about the power of the mind, about how our thoughts create our reality, what once seemed an esoteric affirmation now resonated with a new clarity. Quantum science, which had been my refuge of certainties, was guiding me towards a terrain that I had previously considered impossible. The interconnection between mind, matter, and consciousness. A friend once asked me, "How can you mix science and spirituality? Aren't they opposites?" I reflected for a moment and replied, "Science gives us the how, but spirituality gives us the why. They are two different ways of exploring the same truth. The invisible that connects us." One day, as I walked under a sky full of stars, I stopped and looked up. There they were, those points of light that, though distant, made me feel an inexplicable connection to something greater. I knew that each star was light years away, that its light had traveled billions of miles before reaching my eyes. Science had taught me that. But what it couldn't explain was the feeling of both smallness and grandeur at the same time, that certainty that even though I was a small part of the universe, I was inextricably connected to it. What is this connection we feel with what we cannot see? I asked myself. Scientists call it energy. Mystics call it spirit. But deep down, both are talking about the same thing. The idea that everything is interrelated, that at the deepest level, there is no separation between us and the universe, between our minds and physical reality. Modern physics, in its exploration of the smallest particles, shows us that everything is composed of the same fundamental essence, and this is where science and spirituality converge. Both recognize that there is something invisible, an underlying force that sustains and connects everything that exists. What is the purpose of this connection? The question that kept pursuing me was, why? Why this connection between science and spirituality? Why is everything interrelated in such a profound way, and yet it seems we have lived so long without realizing it? Once, in a deep conversation with someone who was also on a spiritual quest, they told me, "I feel there's something beyond what we see, but I don't know how to explain it." I replied, "Perhaps it's not something that needs to be explained, but something that simply needs to be experienced." And that's how I began to understand that science doesn't have all the answers, just as spirituality doesn't either, but together they offer us a more complete, richer vision of what it means to be alive, what it means to be conscious. Every scientific discovery, every new theory, leads us to a deeper understanding of ourselves, and every spiritual experience brings us closer to the truth that we are not just physical beings, but also beings of energy and consciousness. God in your daily life. What I have learned over the years is that God does not reveal himself only in moments of deep meditation or in spiritual retreats. God is in everyday life, in the simplest acts. He is in the smile of a stranger, in the breeze that caresses your face, in a child's laughter, in the embrace of a loved one. It's easy to think that to connect with the divine, we need to withdraw from the world, but the truth is that the divine is in everything we do. God is in every action, in every thought, in every emotion. What changes is the consciousness with which we do it. Once, while sharing this idea with someone, they told me, "I always thought that to find God, I had to get away from daily life." I replied, "You don't need to go anywhere. All you need is to open your eyes and realize that He has always been here, in what you consider ordinary." The peace of accepting. The search for God is also a path to acceptance. Accepting that we don't always understand everything, accepting that life is full of mysteries that are not meant to be solved but to be lived. When we stop resisting what we don't understand, we find a deep peace. I have found God in moments of greatest uncertainty, in those moments when everything seemed to be falling apart, when there were no clear answers, when fear enveloped me. Because it was in those moments that I realized I didn't need to understand everything, I just needed to trust. And in that trust, I found the presence of the divine. Where are you looking? I invite you to ask yourself, where am I looking for God? Am I expecting to find Him in grand moments, in achievements, or in perfection? Because if so, Perhaps you are missing the beauty that lies in the small moments, in the doubts. God is not something found only in moments of clarity, but also in moments of chaos, because God is not the absence of problems, but the presence that sustains you as you go through them. This journey is personal, unique for each of us. And although our paths may be different, there is a truth we all share. The search for God is ultimately a journey towards ourselves, and in that encounter, we find the divine. Chapter 5. Letting Go of the Old Self, the Transformation of Being. There comes a moment in life when you feel that something has broken inside you, that the world you have carefully built begins to crumble. At first, you feel it as a loss, as if something valuable is being taken from you. But with time, you realize a deeper truth. What is crumbling is the old self, that identity you had created to adapt, to survive, to fit into what you thought you should be. I clearly remember the day I felt I could no longer be who I had been. It was as if I was wearing a skin that no longer belonged to me, a mask that became heavier with each passing day. Everything in me screamed that something had to change, but at the same time, I was afraid of what that would mean. Who would I be if I gave up everything I knew? The fear of letting go. Fear is the first obstacle on the path to transformation. We cling to the old self because it feels familiar, even if it causes us pain. How can I let go of who I've been for so long? I asked myself over and over. The answer didn't come immediately, but little by little, I began to understand that clinging to the old self was what was preventing me from growing. What hurts you the most? A friend asked me once in a moment of deep reflection. I replied almost without thinking, what hurts the most is the resistance. It's clinging to what no longer serves. It's fearing change. The fear of the unknown paralyzes us, but what we don't realize is that the known is where our true essence, our true power, resides. The old self is just a version of ourselves that we built to survive, but not to live fully. The process of shedding. Letting go of the old self is not something that happens overnight. It's a process, sometimes slow, sometimes painful. It feels like a symbolic death, a series of small griefs for the versions of ourselves we leave behind. At first, I felt I was losing something, but I soon realized that what I was losing were only the chains that had kept me prisoner of my own fears and limitations. One day, while walking in a forest, I realized something. Trees, in their natural cycle, drop their leaves every autumn to renew themselves in spring. If trees clung to their old leaves, they could never grow. Why, then, was I clinging to my old self? If I wanted to grow, I had to learn to let go. Sharing this reflection with someone else who was also going through a transformation, I told them, don't be afraid to leave behind the parts of yourself that no longer resonate with who you are meant to be. Those parts don't define you, they have only accompanied you this far, but they don't need to stay with you. Internal resistance. Internal resistance is fierce. We tell ourselves that change is dangerous, that abandoning what we know is risking our security. But the truth is, the security we feel by clinging to the old self is just an illusion. Living in that state of stagnation, clinging to the version of ourselves we created to survive, is like walking in an infinite circle where everything changes around us except ourselves. Once, while reflecting on the resistance I felt, I asked myself, what am I really losing? And the answer came clear as water. I was not losing anything I didn't need to let go of. The fear of losing the old self is actually the fear of discovering what we are capable of being without those limitations. A mentor once told me, the only way to find your true essence is by letting go of everything you thought you were. And with those words, my true journey toward transformation began. The awakening of a new self. Transformation is not just about letting go, it's also the birth of something new. When we renounce the old self, what emerges is our purest essence, that part of us that has always been there, waiting to be discovered. It's the being that is not defined by the expectations of others or by past experiences. It's the being that is free to create, to dream, to be all that we truly are. I remember the first day I felt truly free. It was as if, by dropping the mask of the old self, I had taken a step into a new reality, one in which I didn't have to meet anyone else's expectations but my own. Who am I when I let go of the world's expectations? I asked myself, and the answer was, I am who I have always been, but now I finally allow myself to be. This awakening is not an instant moment of glory, it is a continuous process of discovery. Every day, every decision, is an opportunity to continue freeing ourselves from the layers of the old self, to draw closer to our true nature. A path of integration. I came to the conclusion that science and spirituality can not only coexist but must do so. Because while science provides us with the tools to explore the external universe, spirituality gives us the language to understand the inner universe, and both are equally vast, equally mysterious. In the end, it's not about choosing between one or the other, but about integrating them. It's not about seeing them as opposites, but as allies on the journey toward understanding life. Is that not the true essence of the human being, to be able to embrace both the visible and the invisible, both the verifiable and the inexplicable? What have you discovered by uniting science and spirituality? Someone once asked me. I replied, I've discovered that in the end, both are seeking the same thing, truth, and truth is grander than any of us can imagine. Chapter 7. A Course in Miracles, Revealing True Reality. There was a moment in my life when everything seemed clouded, as if my perception of the world was distorted by an invisible curtain that separated me from the truth. I felt trapped in a reality I didn't fully understand but accepted as the only possible truth. Like many others, I believed that what I saw with my eyes was the only real thing. What else could it be? But then one day, something changed. I encountered a teaching I didn't expect, something that challenged everything I had believed until that moment. The world you see is not reality. This phrase struck me powerfully. At first, I rejected it. How could the world I saw and touched every day be false? And so began my journey with A Course in Miracles. It wasn't an easy journey. It was rather a gentle but powerful dismantling of all the illusions I had built throughout my life. The Course repeatedly invited me to question everything I thought I knew about the world, about myself, and about what it meant to be alive. The illusion of the world. The first great teaching of the Course that resonated in my soul was this: the world you perceive is not reality but a projection of your mind. At first, this idea seemed too abstract, even strange. How can the world be an illusion if I am living it every day? I wondered. But little by little, I began to notice something. I started to observe how my mind shaped the way I experienced reality. On days when I felt at peace, the world around me also seemed calm, almost as if it reflected my inner state. But on days when fear, doubt, or anger consumed me, the world mirrored that same energy back to me, like a cruel and relentless reflection. It was then that I understood. What I see outside myself is nothing more than a reflection of what I carry within. This realization was both liberating and overwhelming. Because if the world I perceive is only a projection of my mind, then the only way to change it is by changing what is within me. Forgiveness as a tool for liberation. One of the most powerful teachings of the Course is forgiveness, but not forgiveness in the traditional sense, where someone has committed a wrong and is absolved. No, the Course's forgiveness is much deeper. It's the recognition that the world you see, with all its wounds and pains, is an illusion, and by seeing it as such, you can free yourself from the burden of judging, blaming, and clinging to resentments. I remember one particular day when this teaching came alive for me. I had been carrying the weight of a betrayal that had deeply wounded me. I couldn't let go of the resentment. I couldn't forgive. I felt that if I forgave, I would somehow be validating what had been done to me. But the Course taught me something different. Forgiveness is not for the other, it's for yourself. It's an act of liberation that allows you to see beyond the illusions of separation and pain. In that moment, I understood. It wasn't about the other person, it was about me. By clinging to resentment, I was trapped in a limited view of reality. To forgive was to see beyond that illusion. It was to choose peace over conflict. And so, with that understanding, forgiveness came, and with it a profound sense of freedom. The reality beyond the senses. The Course teaches that true reality cannot be perceived with the senses. What our eyes see, what our hands touch, what our rational mind rationalizes is only a small fraction of what truly is. True reality is eternal, immutable, and beyond time and space. At first, this teaching seemed almost impossible for me to accept. I had lived my whole life relying on my senses to navigate the world. How could I now believe that what I saw was not reality? But slowly, I began to understand that there was something beyond what the eyes could see, something deeper and truer than the physical. Once, while meditating in silence, I had an experience that changed me forever. I felt for a brief instant that everything I thought I was dissolved. There was no longer a self separate from the rest of the universe. It was as if my consciousness had expanded to encompass everything, And in that instant of clarity, I understood what the Course was trying to teach me. True reality is unity. There is no separation, no duality. There is only one. Miracles. Shifts in perception. The Course talks a lot about miracles, but not in the traditional sense of supernatural events. Miracles, according to the Course, are shifts in perception. They are moments when we see beyond the illusion of separation and remember the truth of who we are. I remember the first time I experienced a miracle in this way. I was in the middle of an argument with someone very close to me. Words were getting harsher, and resentment was growing. Everything in me wanted to defend my position. I wanted to be right. But then, in a moment of grace, I stopped. An inner voice whispered to me, "This conflict is not real. There is nothing to defend, because there is no separation." And in that instant, everything changed. I felt the weight of the conflict vanish, and a deep peace enveloped me. It didn't matter who was right or who was wrong, because in the deepest truth, we were both one. That was my first true miracle, a shift in my perception that allowed me to see beyond the illusion of conflict. Inner peace as the only goal. The Course teaches that our only goal in this world is inner peace. This peace is not found externally. It doesn't depend on what happens in our circumstances. It's a peace that resides deep within our being and that we can only experience when we let go of the world's illusions and allow ourselves to see true reality. Once, in the midst of a difficult situation, I asked myself, how can I find peace in the midst of this chaos? The Course gave me the answer: peace is not in circumstances, it is in your decision to see it. You can choose peace in every moment, regardless of what happens outside. Over time, I've learned that this peace is our natural state, that place we can always return to, even when the outer world seems to be falling apart. Because true reality is not outside us, but within. Chapter 8. The Unity of Being, Not Two, All Interconnected. I always felt there was a distance between me and the world, an invisible separation that made me believe I was alone, that my thoughts and emotions were mine, isolated in a small corner of the universe. For a long time, I walked through life feeling separated from everything and everyone. But deep within my being, there was a silent voice whispering, "It's not true. You're not alone. You never have been." This voice intrigued me, but I ignored it. It was easier to believe in separation, in me against the world, easier to think that my problems were only mine and that the challenges I faced had nothing to do with others. How could I, a single person, be connected to everything that existed? It seemed an abstract, distant, impossible idea until one day, life showed me another reality. The illusion of separation. I remember one particular afternoon when I sat by the sea. The waves moved with a tranquil cadence, an eternal dance that had not begun nor would end with me observing that movement. Suddenly, I felt a truth that disarmed me. I was not separate from those waves. I was not an external observer watching something distant. I was part of everything that was happening, as connected to those waves as the stars are to the sky. In that moment, I understood everything I had believed about being separate was an illusion. I had been seeing the world through a lens that divided, that made me think in terms of me and them, this and that. But deep down, I knew it wasn't so. What we call I is just a small wave in an infinite ocean, an individual expression of a greater unity. How could I have been so blind for so long? I wondered. The answer was simple, because that's how we've been conditioned to see the world, as separate fragments, disconnected from the totality. But the truth, that truth my soul had always known, is that we have never been divided. There are not two, there is only one. The self as unity. The unity of being is not an abstract spiritual theory, it is the fundamental truth of our existence. And the more deeply we understand it, the more we begin to see how it affects every aspect of our lives. If everything is interconnected, then our actions not only impact those around us but resonate in the very fabric of the universe. Once, someone asked me, how can you believe that everything is interconnected if we clearly live separate lives? Each person has their own experience, their own destiny. I replied with a smile, imagine you are in a dream. In that dream, you can see different people, places, and situations. Each one seems distinct, separate from the others. But when you wake up, you realize that all those people and situations were actually parts of you, expressions of your own mind. That's how our life is. It seems we are separate beings, but deep down, we are part of the same consciousness, the same being. The invisible fabric that connects us. As I began to live this truth, I noticed something that had previously gone unnoticed. I began to feel a deep connection with the people around me. They were no longer just individuals with whom I interacted superficially, but reflections of myself. Every encounter, every conversation showed me something about myself. How could I judge another when I saw myself in their eyes? This shift in perspective allowed me to understand that each of us is a unique manifestation of the same essence. What we do to others, we do to ourselves. When we love another, we are loving ourselves. When we forgive, we are also freeing ourselves. A close friend who had been dealing with internal conflicts once asked me, "How can I feel at peace if there is always something or someone who seems to be against me?" I replied, "Peace doesn't come from changing the external, but from seeing that there is no other against you. Everything you see and experience is part of yourself. Peace comes when you understand that separation is only an illusion. Not two, only one." The phrase, "not two," is a profound teaching that has resonated in many spiritual traditions. It doesn't mean that our individualities don't matter, but that our true essence is one. We are different expressions of the same energy, the same consciousness, just as the waves of the sea are different but all belong to the same ocean. One day, while meditating on this truth, I realized something that filled me with peace. There is nothing in this universe that is separate from me. Every star in the sky, every living being, every atom, everything is part of the same being, the same heartbeat. And in that recognition, I knew I had nothing to fear, because I could not be truly alone. I never had been. The transformation that comes with unity. Living from the understanding of unity changes everything. You begin to see life differently. The small irritations of everyday life lose their power because you no longer feel like a victim of external circumstances. You know that everything is interconnected, that every experience has a purpose, and that, at the deepest level, everything is well. I remember a conversation with a person who was deeply distressed by the state of the world. He told me, "It seems like everything is broken. There's so much hate, so much separation." I replied, "Separation is just the surface. Beneath all that, there's a greater truth, a truth that can never be destroyed. We are all connected, and every act of love, however small, has the power to heal that apparent separation." Unity in daily life. But this understanding isn't just for moments of deep meditation or spiritual reflection. It's something we can bring into our daily lives. Every time you choose compassion instead of judgment, every time you decide to see another being as part of you instead of as a stranger, you are living from unity. I invite you to ask yourself, how can I live today from this truth? How can I remember that I am not separate, that I am part of everything around me? Because when you start to see the world this way, everything changes. Relationships deepen, conflict loses its power, and a silent peace begins to fill every corner of your being. Chapter 9. The Inner Enemy. Transforming Adversity into Strength. For a long time, I believed that my greatest challenges came from outside, from circumstances, from the obstacles life placed in my path. But with time and harsh reflection, I discovered a truth that was hard to accept. The greatest enemy was not out there, but within me. It was my mind, my own thoughts, my fears, and my resistance to change that were holding me back. How could my greatest adversary be myself? At first, I refused to accept this idea. It was easier to blame the world, others, circumstances. But every time I tried to escape this truth, something within me reminded me that the real conflict, the one that truly weakened me, was happening inside. The silent struggle. The inner enemy is not always loud. Sometimes it's a silent voice that whispers doubts when you most need confidence. You're not enough. You won't succeed. That voice hides in the shadows, disguised as prudence or rationality, but its purpose is always the same: to keep you small, to prevent you from taking risks, from growing, from transforming. I vividly remember the days when that voice seemed louder than anything else, moments when I felt that no matter how hard I tried, something within me sabotaged every step forward. I wondered, why do I self-sabotage? Why do I feel that every time I take a step forward, something pushes me back? And then I understood, the inner enemy isn't truly evil, it's just scared. That part of me that tried to stop me did so because it feared the unknown, change. Change is scary, and the mind, clinging to the familiar, even if the familiar brings pain, prefers to maintain the status quo rather than risk the uncertain. Adversity as a teacher. In the midst of this internal struggle, I realized something surprising. Adversity, internal conflict, was not the enemy but the teacher. Every time I faced an internal challenge, every time that voice of doubt or fear grew stronger, an opportunity also presented itself. The opportunity to face myself and, in that process, discover a strength I didn't know I had. One day, in the midst of a personal crisis that seemed insurmountable, I stopped and asked myself a simple but profound question: what can I learn from this pain? Instead of continuing to fight my fears, I began to listen to them, and what I discovered was revealing. Every fear, every doubt, was a doorway to a greater understanding of myself. Adversity was showing me my weakest points, not to destroy me, but to give me the opportunity to transform them into strength. How can I turn this fear into power? That was the question that began to guide me. The enemy as a reflection. What surprised me most about this internal struggle was realizing that the inner enemy was not something alien to me, but a part of me that I had been ignoring. That part that feared failure, that doubted itself, that preferred the comfort of the known. But instead of rejecting that enemy, I understood that I had to embrace it. A friend who was also going through a crisis once told me, "I feel like I'm fighting myself every day." I replied, "Perhaps it's not about fighting yourself, but about reconciling with yourself. That part of you that you feel is the enemy just wants to be heard. It's scared, but if you listen, you'll discover that it can transform into your greatest ally." The inner enemy, once understood, doesn't need to be destroyed but transformed, because in that part of us we fear most, in those shadows we avoid, resides our true power. Transforming adversity into strength. Transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, sometimes painful, sometimes slow. But the more I faced my own inner enemy, the more I understood that it wasn't a battle I needed to win, but a relationship I needed to heal. Because the more I fought myself, the weaker I became. But when I began to accept my fears, my doubts, and to see them as opportunities to grow, something changed within me. One day, after a deep conversation with myself, I understood a truth that freed me. True strength does not come from avoiding adversity, but from embracing it and letting it transform you. Every internal challenge, every fear I faced, was strengthening me from within. What I once saw as weakness, I now saw as untapped potential. Fear, doubt, insecurity are just energies that, when transformed, become fuel for our growth. The process of becoming invincible. What I discovered throughout this journey is that the more we accept and confront our inner enemy, the more invincible we become. Not because we eliminate fear, but because we learn to walk with it, to use it as an ally. It no longer paralyzes us but propels us forward with more determination. I remember a particular moment when I was about to face an important decision that terrified me. I felt that familiar feeling of doubt, that inner voice telling me I wouldn't succeed. But instead of fleeing or ignoring that voice, I stopped and asked it, "What are you really afraid of?" And in that inner dialogue, I discovered that the fear was not of failure, but of change, of the unknown. By recognizing this, something within me changed. I no longer saw fear as an obstacle but as a sign that I was about to grow, to expand beyond what I once thought possible. Chapter 10. From Duality to Unity, a Shift in Perception. For much of my life, I lived immersed in the belief of duality, seeing the world divided into opposites: good and bad, light and darkness, success and failure. Everything in my life seemed to be a constant battle between these poles, always seeking the positive and fleeing the negative. However, at some point, that perspective began to feel insufficient. I sensed there was something beyond this constant struggle between opposites, something I couldn't quite see but that had always been there, like a whisper in the quiet. It was at that moment that I began to wonder, what if this division, this duality that I see everywhere, isn't the truth? What if true reality isn't about choosing a side, but about transcending both? The illusion of separation. Duality is a powerful illusion. It makes us believe that we are constantly trapped between extremes, that we must choose between right and wrong, desired and undesired. But what I learned is that this division is just a veil that prevents us from seeing the deeper truth. There are not two, there is only one. I vividly recall an experience I had while meditating, trying to find answers amidst the internal chaos I felt. I was focused on the idea of light and darkness, thinking I had to find a way to stay in the light, to avoid the darkness. But in the midst of that effort, something shifted. I felt that these two forces were not opposites but complementary. Light could not exist without darkness, and darkness was simply a different aspect of the same energy. Suddenly, I understood something. The duality I had perceived my whole life was not real. There was no self separate from the rest of the world. There was no conflict between light and shadow. Everything was a dance of the same unity. The journey towards unity. This shift in perception was a turning point in my life. I stopped fighting duality and began to embrace it as a natural process toward unity. I no longer saw difficulties as obstacles to overcome, but as parts of the same fabric of my experience. How could there be peace if I rejected half of who I am? The journey toward unity is not an escape from opposites but an integration of them. It's understanding that within each of us resides both light and shadow, and that we are not here to choose a side but to embrace both. For in that acceptance, in that integration, we find true peace. Once, someone close to me asked, "How can I find peace in a world so full of chaos?" I replied, "Peace is not found by avoiding chaos, but by accepting it as part of the whole." Chaos and peace are not enemies. They are two sides of the same coin. When we accept both, we transcend duality and find the unity that has always been there, waiting to be seen. The power of the shift in perception. The shift in perception is the first step toward unity. What does this mean? It means that we stop seeing the world as separate from ourselves. Suddenly, it's no longer about them and us, this and that. We begin to see life as a mirror. What we see outside is simply a reflection of what is inside. External struggles are manifestations of internal conflicts. One time, while reflecting on a situation where I felt deeply hurt by someone else's actions, I asked myself, what is truly hurting me here? After sitting with that question, I realized that what I saw as a wound inflicted by another was actually a projection of an unresolved part within myself. I was seeing duality where there was unity. I was seeing separation where there was none. That revelation freed me from blame, judgment, and the need to be right, because in the end, there was no other to blame. Everything was a part of me, and in that recognition, I could see the other with compassion, not as an adversary, but as an extension of myself. Unity beyond duality. To transcend duality does not mean to deny differences, but to see beyond them. It's understanding that although the world appears to be full of opposites, everything is interconnected. Day and night, pain and joy, life and death are not enemies but partners in an eternal dance. I have learned that when we stop fighting against opposites and begin to see them as complements, something profound changes within us. The anxiety about choosing the right path disappears, and in its place, a deep acceptance of all that is emerges. We no longer seek to control life, but to flow with it. Someone once asked me, "How can I learn to accept what I don't understand? What causes me pain?" I replied, "Pain and misunderstanding are part of the same life that also brings you joy and clarity. When you stop resisting pain, you begin to see that it has a purpose, and that purpose is to lead you back to unity." Living from unity. Living from unity does not mean that we stop feeling, that we stop experiencing life in all its intensity. In fact, the opposite is true. When we see the unity behind duality, we begin to live with more authenticity, with more compassion, and with more openness. We no longer fear challenges because we know they are part of a larger whole. We no longer fear failure because we understand that it is not the opposite of success, but part of its path. Every day, life presents us with opportunities to practice this shift in perception. In every difficult situation, in every conflict, in every moment of doubt, we can choose to see duality, or we can look deeper and see the underlying unity. And by doing this, we transform our life experience. I invite you to ask yourself, how can I see unity in this moment? Because the instant we change our perception, the moment we decide to see the totality instead of the fragments, we discover that life is simpler, more beautiful, and more meaningful than we had ever imagined. Chapter 11. The Power of Forgiveness, Releasing Invisible Chains. Forgiveness, a word that for a long time seemed so distant, almost impossible. Not because I didn't know what it meant, but because I couldn't truly feel it within myself. How do you really forgive? I wondered. It wasn't enough to say, "I forgive you," when the wound still burned deep inside. It wasn't enough to want to forget when resentment still haunted my thoughts. How do you free yourself from those invisible chains that bind us to pain? For years, I carried the weight of resentment. I thought it was the only way to protect myself, to prevent anyone from hurting me again. However, what I didn't realize then was that resentment wasn't protecting me, it was keeping me prisoner. How can anyone move forward when their feet are tied by the chains of the past? The illusion of justice. In my mind, there was a clear narrative. If I had been hurt, then there must be justice. I believed that by clinging to the pain, I was somehow claiming that justice. But time taught me a hard and liberating truth at the same time. The justice I sought would not come from outside, but from within. I remember a particular night when, after a long day, I found myself alone with my thoughts. There was something unsettling about the silence. It was the weight of all the times I hadn't forgiven, all the times I had chosen to hold on to resentment as if it were a shield. And then I asked myself, who am I really punishing by not forgiving? The answer was clear. I wasn't punishing those who had hurt me, I was punishing myself. Every time I relived the pain, every time I clung to resentment, I was choosing to carry a weight that didn't belong to me. Forgiveness, I realized in that moment, was not for others, it was for me. Forgiveness as liberation. The day I understood that forgiveness was not a gift I offered to others, but a gift I gave myself, something changed within me. The idea that forgiveness is weakness, that it made me vulnerable, crumbled. In its place, I understood that forgiveness is the most powerful act we can perform, because when we forgive, we are not excusing the actions of others. We are freeing ourselves from the power those actions have over us. Once, someone very close to me, with whom I had had many conflicts, asked me, "How can you forgive me after everything that happened?" I reflected for a moment and replied, "I forgive you not because what occurred didn't hurt me, but because I don't want to keep living in that pain. I want to be free." That is the essence of forgiveness. It is an act of liberation. It removes the invisible chains that bind us to the past, that keep us anchored to moments of pain, preventing us from moving towards the peace we all deserve. How can you walk into the future if you are still chained to what hurt you? Forgiving yourself. Forgiving others is a challenge, but forgiving oneself is perhaps the most difficult act of all. Throughout my life, I realized that while I could work on forgiving others, the person I judged most harshly was myself. Every mistake, every wrong decision, became another burden that prevented me from moving forward. How could I free myself if I wasn't capable of looking at myself with compassion? There was a particular day when I confronted this truth. I was alone, reflecting on all the decisions I had made, the opportunities one had missed, the words I never said. And I felt an immense wave of guilt. I couldn't forgive myself for not having been perfect, for having failed so many times. But then something in me shifted. I understood that perfection was not what I needed. What I needed was compassion for myself. I asked myself softly, how can I forgive myself for what I did? For what I didn't do? For what I was? The answer was simple, by forgiving yourself. You deserve your own forgiveness. Just as we forgive others to free ourselves from pain, we need to forgive ourselves to be able to grow and be free. The invisible chains. Emotional wounds are like invisible chains that we carry with us wherever we go. Sometimes we don't realize they're there until they prevent us from moving forward. These chains are not external. They don't come from the people who hurt us, but from within ourselves. They are the unresolved feelings, the unhealed wounds, and the guilt we haven't let go of. Someone once told me, I can't forgive because I feel that by doing so, I'm letting them get away with it. I replied, forgiveness isn't about them, it's about you. By forgiving, you don't give them power, you give it to yourself. Because when you don't forgive, you remain bound to that pain. Forgiveness is the key that breaks those chains. Every time we choose to forgive, we break an invisible chain. Every time we let go of resentment, we take a step toward our own freedom. Forgiveness as a path to peace. Forgiveness is an act of courage, not because it's easy, but because it requires us to open our hearts again, even after being hurt. But the reward is peace. There is nothing more liberating than knowing that we are no longer bound to past pain. When we forgive, we reclaim our power, our serenity, and our ability to live in the present. I remember the moment I finally understood this deep within my being. I had been clinging to the pain of a betrayal for years, thinking that if I let go of that pain, I would be allowing what occurred to be okay. But one day, while walking alone on a path, I realized something. I wasn't forgiving to make peace with the past. I was forgiving to make peace with myself in the present. That revelation filled me with an indescribable peace. The past couldn't change, but my relationship with it could, and in that change, I found a new freedom. Chapter 12. Emotional Epigenetics. Inheritances that can be changed. There's a moment in life when you realize that you are not solely the result of your own decisions. There's something deeper, older, that has been shaping you even before you could be conscious of it. Sometimes, that something feels like an invisible weight, an echo of stories that aren't yours, yet you somehow keep repeating them. Where does this fear come from that I can't explain? Why do certain patterns in my life seem to repeat over and over? It was at that moment that I began to explore the idea of emotional epigenetics. At first, it seemed like a distant concept, something that belonged only to science, to the field of genetic study. But the more I investigated, the more I understood that it wasn't just about our genes, but also about the emotions, the experiences that have been imprinted deep within our being. Is it possible that we are carrying unresolved emotions from those who came before us? The answer, as surprising as it may seem, is yes. Invisible inheritances. I remember a particular day when I realized that some of the fears I felt weren't truly mine. It was a quiet afternoon, and as I reflected on the cycles of anxiety that often appeared for no apparent reason, I began to think about my family, about the stories of my parents, my grandparents. It was as if a door opened within me, revealing that those fears that held me back so much had not begun with me. They were echoes of past generations, unresolved emotions that had been transmitted not through words, but through an invisible inheritance. How can it be that we carry the pain of those who preceded us? I wondered. Is it fair that we bear the scars of experiences we didn't live? But the deeper I delved into this exploration, the more I understood that it wasn't a matter of justice, it was a matter of recognition. How can you heal what you didn't even know was there? The power to transform what's inherited. Emotional epigenetics teaches us that the experiences of our ancestors, especially traumas and intense emotions, can leave imprints on us, on our emotional biology. But what surprised me most was discovering that these imprints are not permanent. We can change them. It's true that we inherit certain emotional predispositions, but we are not condemned to repeat the stories of those who came before us. We have the power to rewrite that legacy. And here lies the beauty of emotional epigenetics. What was recorded in our being through generations is not sealed. We can transform these inheritances. We can heal what was not healed before, and in that process, free ourselves from the cycles that have kept us bound. I remember a conversation with a friend who felt his life was trapped in an endless cycle of failures. It's as if I can't move forward, as if something is holding me back from within, but I don't know what it is, he told me. I reflected for a moment and replied, perhaps what you're feeling isn't just yours. Perhaps you're carrying a pain that comes from further back, but the good news is that you have the power to free yourself from it. Listening to the past to heal the present. One of the most revealing moments on my path was realizing that the past is not dead. The emotions, the experiences of our ancestors, live in us. We cannot change what happened, but we can change the way those experiences influence us. How? By listening to them, acknowledging them, and then consciously choosing a new direction. The key to transforming these emotional inheritances is not to ignore them, but to face them with compassion and awareness. When we begin to recognize these inherited patterns, whether they are fears, insecurities, or even ways of loving and suffering, we open the door to healing. How can I change something that isn't even mine? I wondered. And the answer was clear, by accepting it first as part of my story, but then consciously choosing to release it. One day, while meditating on a situation in which I felt trapped, an image came to mind, a long thread extending from my heart to a distant past. I knew at that instant that this thread represented an unresolved emotional connection from my lineage, a burden that had been passed down from generation to generation. But I also knew that I could let it go, that I was not destined to carry it forever. Breaking the chains of the past. The great power of emotional epigenetics is that we are not destined to repeat the past. We are not condemned to live under the shadows of what others lived. When we realize this, we begin to see our lives with new eyes. What invisible chains have I been dragging without realizing it? And more importantly, how can I break them forever? The answer lies in the present. In every moment, we have the opportunity to heal, to take those emotions that were not processed by our ancestors and release them, to stop repeating cycles of suffering and instead create a new story for ourselves and for future generations. I once read that healing oneself is healing the entire family line. At first, that idea seemed too poetic to me, but now I understand its truth. Every time we choose love over fear, every time we transform a negative pattern into a positive one, we are not only changing our own life but freeing those who came before us and also those who will come after. The legacy we choose to leave. Although we inherit much from those who came before us, we are also the creators of what we will leave behind. And that is the true beauty of emotional epigenetics. While we cannot choose what we inherit, we can choose what we pass on to others. Every time we heal an emotional wound, we are creating a new path, not only for ourselves but for future generations. Think about this. What emotional legacy do you want to leave? We are not here just to live our own stories. We are here to heal, to transform, to change the course of an entire lineage of souls who preceded us. And in that process, we create a freer, more fulfilling life, not only for ourselves but for all who will come after. Chapter 13. The Wisdom of Emotions. Listening to your inner self. There's something that has always been with me, something that has never left me, though for a long time I didn't know how to listen to it. These are emotions. I treated them as uncomfortable visitors, as an obstacle I had to overcome to reach calm. But one day, while in the midst of an emotional storm, something changed. I stopped running, and for the first time, I listened to what my emotions had to tell me. What am I feeling? I asked myself, not from my mind, but from my heart. And at that moment, a simple but profound truth revealed itself. My emotions are not my enemies, they are my teachers. Each one of them, whether joy, sadness, fear, or anger, is here to guide me, to show me something I need to see, something I have been ignoring. Emotions as messengers. For a long time, I was taught to suppress my emotions, to stay strong, not to show weakness. I learned that some emotions were good and others bad. Joy, gratitude, love, those were fine. But fear, sadness, anger, these were emotions I should avoid, that I should hide. How is it possible that parts of ourselves are so rejected? However, the more I tried to suppress those emotions I considered uncomfortable, the more power they seemed to have over me. It was as if by pushing them to the depths of my being, they returned with greater force, seeking to be heard. It was then that I understood that every emotion, no matter how uncomfortable it might seem, carries a message. What are you trying to tell me? That was the question I began to ask myself every time a strong emotion arose within me. And over time, I realized that these emotions were not here to destroy me, but to reveal something to me. Fear showed me where I needed to pay attention. Sadness connected me with what truly mattered to me. Anger revealed my boundaries, what I was no longer willing to accept. Listening to the silence behind the emotion. I remember an afternoon when, after a long day filled with frustrations, I sat alone in my room. I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't explain. In the past, I would have tried to distract myself, to dull those feelings with anything I had at hand. But this time, I decided to do something different. I closed my eyes and listened. At first, all I felt was a whirlwind of rage, exhaustion, and confusion. But little by little, as I breathed deeply, I began to notice something more, a silence behind all those emotions, an internal space where everything was calm. And in that silence, I understood something essential. Emotions are like waves that come and go, but behind them is an ocean of peace that is never disturbed. That afternoon was a revelation for me. I realized that I didn't need to flee from my emotions, because behind them was a deeper truth waiting to be discovered. What can I learn from this? I asked myself. And so I began to befriend my emotions, not as enemies to conquer, but as traveling companions who had wisdom to offer me. Emotions as guides. Every emotion we feel has a purpose. They are not there by accident. Whether it's the joy we feel in moments of success or the sadness that envelopes us on dark days, every emotion is here to guide us toward a deeper truth about ourselves. Once, while talking with someone who felt trapped in overwhelming sadness, they asked me, "How can I free myself from this pain?" I reflected for a moment before answering, "Perhaps it's not about freeing yourself from sadness, but about listening to what it has to tell you. Because behind that sadness is a truth that needs to be seen." And so it is, when we listen to our emotions instead of resisting them, they begin to transform. They are no longer storms that drag us away, but signals that guide us. Fear shows us the paths we have not explored. Sadness leads us back to what we have lost so that we can heal. Anger reminds us that something in our life is not aligned with our truth. The art of listening. Learning to listen to our emotions is an art. It requires time, patience, and, above all, presence. In a world that constantly tells us we must be happy, that we must maintain an image of success and strength, it's easy to forget how to listen to what we truly feel. But our emotions cannot be ignored forever. Eventually, they will find a way to be heard, whether through the body, the soul, or a moment of crisis. I remember a time when I felt a deep sadness for no apparent reason. At first, I tried to push it away, to move on as if nothing were wrong. But the sadness remained like a silent shadow. One day, I decided to sit with that emotion. I didn't want to understand it with my mind, but to feel it. It was like opening a door to a place that had been closed for a long time. And what I discovered surprised me. That sadness was not a bad thing. It was an invitation to connect with my vulnerability, with my humanity, with parts of me that I had been ignoring. At the end of that experience, I felt lighter, not because the sadness had completely disappeared, but because I had finally listened to it. What part of yourself have you been avoiding listening to? That is the question we all must ask ourselves at some point in our lives. Inner wisdom. Our emotions are the gateway to our inner wisdom. They are the language our soul uses to speak to us. And when we learn to listen to them attentively, we begin to discover answers we never would have found otherwise. One day, while talking with someone who felt deeply confused about the direction of their life, I told them, listen to your emotions. They know what your mind cannot understand. If you sit in silence and allow them to express themselves, they will show you the way. Because our emotions not only tell us what we feel in the present, but also connect us with what we need for our future. Sometimes an emotion of fear or doubt is not an obstacle but a sign that we are about to discover something new. What are your emotions telling you today? What guidance can you find in them if you choose to listen attentively? Chapter 14. The Art of Listening, the Key to Inner Peace. I always believed I knew how to listen. Like many, I thought listening was a simple act, paying attention to the words someone else was saying. But over time, I realized that listening goes far beyond what sounds in our ears. Truly listening is an art we rarely practice, yet it's one of the most powerful keys to finding inner peace. How can you find peace amidst the noise of the world? That's the question many of us ask ourselves daily. We find ourselves caught in the hustle and bustle of our own minds, in the endless distractions that surround us. But the true secret to peace is not in moving away from that external noise, but in learning to listen to it in a new way, not with our ears, but with our heart. Listening beyond words. I remember a day when everything seemed to be too much. Work, responsibilities, expectations, everything piled up on me. I felt overwhelmed, unable to find a moment of calm. Then, in the midst of that internal storm, I decided to do something different. Instead of trying to escape the chaos, I stopped and asked myself, what is my body, my mind, telling me? For the first time, I realized that there was a message in that chaos, in that feeling of exhaustion. I had been ignoring the signals my own being was sending me, asking for rest, asking for space to breathe. By listening to myself, not from an analytical mind, but from the deepest place of my being, I felt unexpected relief, as if in the simple act of listening, the weight began to fade. How much do you listen to your own body, your own soul? This is a question we should all ask ourselves. Listening is not just something we do outwardly, but also inwardly. When we learn to listen to ourselves, not from judgment or the need to fix everything immediately, but from compassion, something changes within us. That's the first step towards inner peace, listening to what's inside us without trying to change it, simply accepting it. Silence as a teacher. True listening doesn't always require words. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is sit in silence and let the silence speak. We fear silence because we think something we don't want to face hides within it. But in reality, silence is the space where the deepest truth is revealed. Once, while alone in nature, I found myself surrounded by a silence that I could almost touch. There was no human sound, only the soft whisper of the wind and the distant beat of my own heart. In that moment, I realized something. Silence is not empty. It is full of answers I had been searching for but couldn't hear amidst the constant noise of daily life. Silence, I realized, is not the absence of sound. It is the space where the deepest truths emerge. But to reach that space, we must first learn to be comfortable with it. What emerges when you allow yourself to be in silence? Instead of fearing what might appear in that empty space, we must learn to embrace it, because in that embrace, we find the peace that the world's noise can never give us. Listening to others from the heart. Another aspect of the art of listening that transformed my life was realizing that when we truly listen to others, we are not simply hearing their words. We are connecting with their humanity, with their deepest being. And that connection, when genuine, is healing for both parties. Once, someone going through a very difficult time approached me. They didn't want solutions. They didn't need advice. They just wanted to be heard. And as they spoke, I realized something. I wasn't just listening to their words. I was listening to the space between them, the unspoken emotions, the pain hidden behind each pause. In that moment, I understood that sometimes the most powerful act we can offer someone is not to speak, but to listen from the heart, with empathy, with presence. After that conversation, that person told me, "Thank you for listening. I feel lighter." And the curious thing was that I also felt lighter. By truly listening, we free ourselves as much as we free the other, because listening, when we do it with our whole being, is an act of love. Listening as a path to inner peace. The art of listening is not just a tool for connecting with others or with ourselves, but also a path to inner peace. When we stop trying to control every situation, every conversation, and simply open ourselves to listen, something else happens. We stop feeling the need to have all the answers, to solve all the problems. Instead, we allow ourselves to be present, whole, here and now. How can you find peace in the midst of such a busy life? That's the question many of us face. The answer, I discovered, is not in doing less or in seeking a distraction-free place. It's in changing the way we relate to everything that happens around us. Instead of reacting, we can learn to listen to the moment, to listen to our emotions, to listen to others. And in that listening, we find a calm we had not felt before. I remember an afternoon when everything seemed to be in chaos. Work was piling up, responsibilities seemed impossible to manage, and my mind wouldn't stop racing in circles. Instead of trying to solve everything immediately, I decided to simply listen. I sat in silence, closed my eyes, and let the moment unfold around me. Slowly, the chaos began to dissipate, not because the circumstances had changed, but because my relationship with them had changed. I had chosen to listen instead of react. The magic of listening to the now. One of the greatest gifts the art of listening offers us is the ability to be truly present. When we truly listen, we are not thinking about the past or worrying about the future. We are here, now, completely immersed in the moment, and in that state of presence we find peace. The present is the only place where peace can exist. When we are completely present, listening to what is happening within us and around us, worries begin to fade, because peace is not something we must seek outside ourselves. Peace is always available, waiting to be discovered in the present moment. We just need to learn to listen to it. Chapter 15, The Awakening of Consciousness, A Journey to Self-Knowledge. There was a moment in my life when I thought I knew who I was. Like many, I believed my identity was clear, defined by my experiences, my achievements, my failures. I saw myself as a set of labels, of roles I had assumed over the years. But one day, all that crumbled. In an instant of deep introspection, I realized that what I thought I was nothing more than a mask, a superficial layer that hid a deeper truth. Who am I, really? That was the question that began to swirl in my mind, and with it, a journey I had not anticipated began, the journey toward the awakening of consciousness. The beginning of awakening. The awakening of consciousness doesn't happen suddenly. It's not a moment of sudden enlightenment, but a process that unfolds slowly, like a dawn that gradually dispels the darkness. For me, that awakening began in moments of silence, when I allowed myself to be alone with my thoughts, without distractions, without the constant need to do or be something. It was in those spaces of quiet that I began to notice an inner voice, a whisper that invited me to look beyond the surface. What is consciousness? I wondered. I had lived so long disconnected from it, busy in the inertia of daily life, that I hadn't realized there was something deeper that needed to be explored. Consciousness, I discovered, is not just the ability to think or to be aware of the external world. It's the ability to observe ourselves, to see beyond what we believe we are, and to connect with that part of us that is eternal, infinite, and true. The awakening of the inner observer. One of the most transformative moments of my journey was when I discovered the inner observer. This part of me was not the I that reacted, that thought, that felt. It was a deeper, quieter presence that simply observed. And in that discovery, I realized something powerful. I am not my thoughts. I am not my emotions. I am not the stories I tell myself. I am the one who observes all of that. I remember a particular day when I was immersed in an intense emotional storm. My thoughts raced at 1,000 miles an hour, trying to make sense of what I felt, seeking solutions, seeking answers. But then something changed. I stopped and asked myself, who is observing these thoughts? In that moment, I realized that there was a part of me that was not trapped in the chaos, a part that simply observed calmly, without judgment. That was the beginning of a profound change in my life. I discovered that by connecting with that inner observer, I could begin to disidentify from my thoughts and emotions. They were like clouds crossing the sky. The sky remains unchangeable while the clouds come and go. And that is our consciousness. It is the space in which everything happens, but it is not affected by what happens within it. The journey to self-knowledge. The awakening of consciousness is essentially a journey to self-knowledge. But this self-knowledge is not about what you do or what you have achieved. It is a deeper, more authentic knowledge. It is the recognition of who you are in the deepest part of your being, beyond the roles you have assumed, beyond the masks you have worn. Once, while reflecting on my life, I realized that I had spent so much time trying to fit into molds, into expectations, that I had moved away from my purest truth. Who am I without all these conditionings? That question led me to look within myself with a new perspective. I began to see that beneath the layers of fear, doubt, and insecurity, there was an intact essence, a part of me that had been waiting to be discovered. Self-knowledge is not a process that ends. It is a continuous journey, an exploration that never ceases to deepen. Every time we think we have reached a new understanding of ourselves, something more is revealed, and in that continuous discovery, we find a truth that is increasingly deep, increasingly free. The challenges of awakening. The awakening of consciousness is not without its challenges. In fact, one of the biggest obstacles I encountered on my path was facing the parts of me I had been avoiding for years, the shadows I didn't want to see, the fears I didn't want to confront. But awakening means seeing everything, not just what is comfortable. I remember a moment when I realized that to advance on my journey, I needed to confront those parts of myself that I had been hiding. The fear of rejection, the fear of not being enough, the fear of failure. All of that needed to be seen, acknowledged, and finally embraced. I couldn't fully awaken if I wasn't willing to see everything within me, both the light and the shadow. How can you awaken if parts of yourself remain asleep? That was the question that accompanied me during those moments of internal confrontation. And although it was difficult, I discovered that by embracing those parts of me, by seeing them with compassion instead of judgment, something within me began to heal. Because the awakening of consciousness is not just about discovering our light, but also about integrating our shadows. The freedom that awakening brings. The awakening of consciousness not only leads us to greater self-knowledge, but also grants us a freedom we had never imagined. By awakening, we free ourselves from the invisible chains that kept us trapped in thought patterns, in fears, in limiting beliefs. We realize that we are greater than our circumstances, more powerful than our limitations. Once, someone close to me asked, "How can I free myself from the patterns that always trip me up?" I replied, "The first step is to see those patterns for what they are, stories you've been telling yourself but that are not your truth. When you realize that you are not bound by those stories, you begin to free yourself." Awakening allows us to see that we have always been free, but we didn't know it. We have identified so much with our circumstances, with our emotions, with our stories, that we forget that we are much more than all that. True freedom comes when we realize that we are the space in which everything happens, not the things that happen in that space. Epilogue. The beginning of a new awakening. The journey we have taken together throughout these pages is not the end. In fact, if there's one thing I've learned along this path, it's that there are no endings when it comes to self-knowledge, consciousness, or life itself. Everything is an endless cycle of transformation, growth, and awakening. Each of us has come to this life with a unique mission, though we often cannot see it clearly at first. We get lost in the distractions of the external world, in the expectations others have placed upon us, and in the fears we have accumulated over time. But the true essence of who we are never fades, never gets lost. It is always there, waiting for us to discover it, to claim it. At the end of this book, perhaps you have realized something important. You haven't been looking for answers outside, but within. Every word, every reflection, every chapter has been nothing more than an invitation to return to yourself, to remember the truth that has always been in the deepest part of your being. Because all the answers you need, all the love you long for, all the peace you seek, already reside within you. A continuous awakening. The awakening of consciousness is not an isolated event. It is a continuous process, a dance between being and becoming, between what we already are and what we are destined to discover. Sometimes that awakening occurs in moments of deep quiet, in the silence of meditation, or in a sincere look inward. Other times, it occurs in the midst of chaos, pain, or seemingly insurmountable challenges. But it is always there, offering itself to us, waiting for us to be ready to receive it. Are you ready to continue this journey? Because although these pages come to an end, the true journey is just beginning. This is the starting point for a new chapter in your life, one in which you draw closer and closer to your true essence, to that inner light that has always been shining, even in the darkest moments. The magic of presence. At the end of the day, all we truly have is this moment, the present. The magic of life does not reside in the past or in the expectations of the future, but in the ability to be here, now, completely present. When we learn to live from that presence, from that awakened consciousness, everything changes. Struggles seem less overwhelming, fears lose their strength, and peace becomes our natural state. Living from consciousness does not mean that we will never face challenges or that we will never feel pain. It means that even in those moments, we can find a place of calm and wisdom within ourselves. It means that we are capable of walking through the world with an open heart, without fear, knowing that everything we experience is part of the journey toward our evolution. The final invitation. And so, here you are, on the brink of a new beginning. You have walked this path with me, but now it is your turn to continue walking on your own, to carry with you the lessons, the reflections, and the truths that have resonated in your heart. What you do with them is up to you. I invite you to keep listening to your inner self, to keep exploring the depths of your being, because self-knowledge, the awakening of consciousness, is a gift that never ceases to surprise us. There is always more to discover, more to learn, more to love. This is not the end, dear reader. It is only the beginning of a journey that will take you to places you never would have imagined, both inside and outside yourself. So go forth with an open heart and an awakened mind, because what awaits you on this path is more beautiful than you could have dreamed. Thank you for sharing this space with me, and remember, true peace, true wisdom, are not found in what we possess or achieve, but in who we are, in the deep stillness that resides within us. May this be the beginning of a continuous awakening, of a life lived from authenticity and presence.